David, reimagined value. I'm taking that this photo wasn't New Year's Eve, so reimagining the value was pretty important. So if we keep in mind the top line, the above the line mission, and the below the line mission. So the above the line was nation building and stopping the flow of arms across the Iran border. And then, of course, the below the line mission, which was most important to you, was bring them all home. Bring them all home, which is, so important. So the pivot.
Well, yes, something had to be done. And my predecessor had stayed for 6 months. And yes, he lost people. He didn't lose people. The enemy got some of his people. And we were losing people injured. We lost 36 injuries during our time in camp.
And so we talk about always. Every night you were in camp.
Nearly 189 times, but sometimes it was day and night, and then we'd get a day off, and we'd all wander around thinking, is that it? Is it over? And of course it wasn't, and it never was, and it never would be. So I'd been hatching a plan for a while, and I had tried it through my chain of command to say, look, I'd like to do this. And I had a very loyal chain of command above who trusted and believed in me. But they had to take this decision up to London, and London, because we were in a coalition, had to take it to Washington, and Washington said, you cannot give up ground. You cannot give the enemy that position, because of course they will immediately have free rein just to bring everything through the back door and destroy the American forces in Baghdad.
And keep in mind that the US forces have always loved the idea of camp, haven't they?
They are very camp-based. They always bring in their own creature comforts. So in a US camp, you will normally have a McDonald's, for instance, in from America, full McDonald's, complete with queuing and the right tables and the right bits. And if you're lucky in an American camp, they give people choice. So they'll bring in a Burger King as well. So, you know, you've got choice, and the camps get bigger and bigger. And we had started to suffer from the same thing. We were a very big force, doing very little work, delivering few experts to police stations. And when we did, it was a battle group operation with tanks and guns and helmets and planning for weeks just to get 3 policemen into a police station, get some training done with the police, and then get out again. And I'm not sure if I tell the story, these police were way off the mark in terms of what we expect. We were trying to bring in the rule of law and due process. So we wanted to have a chain of evidence and people going to court. And then if convicted, people would then go to jail, perhaps, for their sins. And one day we had a murderer who had got angry in the heat and had shot his neighbor with a Kalashnikov from another family. And so we said to the police, right, you've got a chain of evidence, you've arrested a man for this crime of murder. It looks like an open and shut case, but we have to go through the process. And we explained the process up into court in front of a judge and to have an evidence trail. And the next morning I got a phone call and it just said, we let him go. And I was shocked. I said, why did you let him go? And he said, well, it's all sorted. And I said, what do you mean? Well, his family have promised to pay $5,000 American to the other family, and they've promised 3 women in marriage at a future time to the other family. Blood money was paid. That was all that could happen. So that was the problem we were up against, and we were delivering 3 men to a police station once every 2 weeks. We weren't even tickling the problem that we needed to solve in this part of the world. So I asked the chain of command if I could close the camp. And they said, well, how are you going to do your job if you don't have a base? And I said, we will become nomads. We will become Bedouin. We will disappear into the night. We have a huge desert. It's nearly 300 kilometers long, this province. It's 200 kilometers wide. Most of it is desert. we can operate from the desert. And of course, that went up the chain. And each time my very loyal superiors came back and said, I don't think they're going to say yes, David. In fact, they were saying no, but we were asking again and again above me. But I didn't know that they'd said no several times, and they were very bored of saying no to Labouchere. So one night I said, I'm bored of waiting for an answer, and I'm really bored of having these bombs land on my people. So we are going to leave. And the sun set on that camp for the last time, and we went out into the desert, and we sent our tanks south, and the tanks motored south and arrived in Basra. And my boss, a very good brigadier called Everard, said, what are these doing here? And they said, where is Labouchere? And the squadron leader said, I've no idea, he went into the desert. And at this point, I had created in the vernacular, a shitstorm. Because the message went up to the Americans went to Whitehall went to Washington. There were people flying backwards and forwards across the Atlantic because we had given up the Americans' back door. We had exposed the whole mission in their minds, and the mission would now fail because one rogue commander had done something without permission. Now, we were now free. We were now in the desert. We took our helmets off most of the time. We took our body armor off most of the time. We had clear fields of view for miles and miles. Nobody could come close to us. We supplied ourselves using C-130s. This is Special Forces pilots with the RAF who could land a very large transport plane on an unprepared desert. And sometimes they wouldn't even stop. They would half land, touch and go, and shove the stuff out of the back as they're landing, and it would roll across the desert, and we'd be there to pick it up, take our supplies, and get on. And sometimes they would even stop, and it would be dead of night, no lights, just this roar of an aircraft coming in. You have to hope that you're not on the runway. And then you'd chase after it in your Land Rovers, go and put the bodies on that were going onto the aircraft, as in live bodies going home, and take new people off the aircraft and into your Land Rovers and get on with the job. And we patrolled the border. This is...
famous photo.
It's a great photo. It was on the front page of the Times in early September of 2006. And it's Queen's Royal Azhar soldiers on foot patrol on the border of Iran and Iraq, making sure that arms and ammunition did not come into Iraq. And here is a cut-down Land Rover. We made these as light as possible. Actually, that's mine.
I can see you in the front. You look like you're having a terrible time.
Well, this was boys' own stuff. This was absolute nirvana. My father had taught me to drive in a Land Rover. And now, every time we got into a sticky situation, my driver would look across and say, I'm not going to get in the shit here. Colonel, do you want to drive? At which point I'd say, yes, I'll drive it. And I was just having a ball getting around the whole desert. And we traveled light with a much smaller force. We were only about 400 in the desert, having given up all those heavy armored infantry and given up our tanks. We were down to 400 soldiers.
But that wasn't the way it was viewed, was it?
Well, the joy of this is that we could travel so fast that reporters for the opposition were reporting back to Al-Amara that Labouchere and his teams had been seen in this area. And they might be riding a donkey into town, and it took them 2 days to make that report. And then at the same time, a chap with a phone would be reporting the same force, but he didn't know it was the same force, 200 kilometers away in the north of the area, or another 100 kilometers east in the east of the area. And the enemy, the opposition, the militias, never knew where we were, but assumed we were everywhere. And so they thought we had doubled in size, when in fact we were almost a third of the size. And now we were spending our time getting around to hospitals. We hid in the desert. Nobody could see us. We guarded ourselves. We administered ourselves. This is one of our soldiers using a Land Rover wing mirror to shave in the morning. He'll put the wing mirror back onto the Land Rover when he's had his shave. This is life in the desert. We were nomads, we were Bedouin, and it was a fantastic life. 12 hours sleep a night, and during the day, thrashing around the desert in high, high heat. It was 61.9 degrees at its hottest.
But tell me this, because I'm fascinated by this. So in the camp, how many on sentry? How many people guarding each night?
A company's men every night, 120 men guarding the perimeter, keeping the rest of us safe from ground attack. And it worked. Nobody ever attacked us from the ground because we had 120 men guarding us.
Tell me, in the desert, how many people on sentry?
One.
One person.
One with night vision goggles.
Pivot.
Pivot. One person sitting up on a bund. Every 2 or 4 hours, he'd be replaced by another person. And that was the only demand that was not going directly towards the mission. That was our only protection.
And so tell me, because I'm really fascinated now, how many times were you attacked? How many times were you bombed at night in the desert? Never. Never at night.
And we never received any injury caused by opposition activity.
So pivot. Mission maintained, strategy change.
Totally.
And so then I look at that, and then we ask, because I know that Tina's on this call, and we know what a champion of good sleep Tina is. So average sleep in the camp?
4 hours unbroken.
4 hours unbroken. Average sleep in the desert?
As soon as it went dark, we'd prepare for the next day and go to bed. 12 hours.
Okay. So there's a piece of that there. I think this is really important because, people can change their strategy, but if the outcomes don't change, then that piece is important. But when you do this, so there's some really good piece for the underlying mission. Tell us a bit about the above the line mission in terms of nation building, and also stopping the flow of arms.
Well, we took our helmets off for a start. A man with a helmet is pretty imposing. A man with no helmet is another man. Mm. And we engaged the local families, we engaged the local tribes. In fact, we traveled from tribe to tribe, talking to the elders, sitting in circles, cross-legged, agony for the modern Western man. And we gave them money and opportunity to be big in front of their families. Not surprisingly, they took the money and the opportunity, and yet none of it was misused. It was all applied to local schools and hospitals. And we saw immediately that we became accepted. We were not feeding ourselves now with a convoy of armored vehicles that took over the whole road for 120 kilometers. But instead, we were going to local villages and buying the bread from the ladies who were making the bread. So they were now cooking extra bread and we were buying it. Probably for an inflated price, it didn't matter. We were investing in the local people and they learned to love us and we were welcomed everywhere we went. And we started leaving our weapons in the Land Rovers. Yes, under guard, but we were presenting ourselves as people who were giving rather than protecting ourselves or being a threat.
And what did some of that giving look like? Yeah.
Well, this is a picture of one of our females, but of course, there was a huge need in this highly oppressed, 20 years of oppression area that Saddam Hussein had left to fester. And so the women had no health care. We had our medics delivering babies in makeshift hospitals. We had a school team who were bringing the buildings back, the physical buildings back, but also teaching regimens back to schools. And this is typical. Whenever we went anywhere, they dressed in their finery to welcome us. And these are kids and actually my driver on the left and another soldier from the Queen's Royal Hussars on the right. But we were welcomed everywhere, and suddenly the whole mission became easy, just easy. Because we had got rid of the baggage and we had earned the consent. We had engaged our people who loved it out there. These soldiers didn't want to go back to Basra, where they would be put on guard duty, even during their downtime, because everybody had to do guard duty. These soldiers wanted to stay in the desert. And I must admit that I had difficulty leaving the desert too, to go back for instructions, etc. Especially as every time I went back, I was questioned by some very high-ranking people about what I was doing and why.
So when you were in the camp, how many of your soldiers, as they finished their tour in the camp, how many asked to stay?
Oh no, everybody wanted to leave. There was no sense that anybody wanted to be there.
In the desert?
Oh, they wouldn't leave. Okay. This was boys' own stuff. We were welcome wherever we went. We were ostensibly delivering the good things that we were there to deliver. I still had $10 million in my Land Rover.
So you could afford some bread.
And we weren't short of bread. We weren't short of fuel. We would buy a whole tanker that was coming across that illegal border, because I didn't try to stop all traffic across the border. This is trading nations. They've done trade for 4,000 years through that area. What I did was I asked the local tribal leaders to stop the supply of arms and ammunition. We didn't try to do it. We asked them to do it for us. And of course, because we were delivering good, they said, this is a fair trade. We will stop anybody trafficking arms and weapons, but we won't stop the fridges. We won't stop the air conditioners. This is modern trade. We won't stop the carpets, old trade. We won't stop the spices. We won't stop the drugs. All that will continue because it's lucrative. And our view was, fine, just don't let any bombs or bullets go through. Now, there's an arms souk in Alamara.
And this was a great metric for you.
Well, it was the only metric. Yeah. Because how do you prove a negative? How do you prove that you stopped all the weapons coming in? And the way we proved it was to go into Alamara quite shiftily, like we would try to dress locally and get in and out, because you'd never actually survive very long locally. But we'd go in and we'd check the price of weapons in the arms souk. Because in Alamara, it's not about who has the nicest car. It's not about who has the latest laptop. It's all about who's got the latest gun or bomb or RPG-7, because everybody's armed. So there's an arms souk. And the cost of a Kalashnikov when we arrived and when we were being attacked was $150. That's an AK-47. The cost when we went onto the border was up to $1,500, and those were hard to find, and you couldn't get an RPG for love or money. They just weren't available anymore. So we knew from market forces that we were doing the right thing, and we had certainly disrupted the supply to a significant level. And that was our task. And the American intelligence reported back through the chain that somehow, even though the Brits had let us down again, somehow the supply of weaponry had dried up.
So there's delivering on the American part of the bargain as well. But then I love this next slide because it represents what I feel like you felt like you were truly there to do.
Yep, this is me back to school, about 35 years on, sitting at a desk in a working classroom in a school that hadn't been working 3 weeks before we got into the desert. And this is one of my operations officers. This man actually earned a military cross in those first 4 months of us being in the country, and for bravery in battle. While we were trying to deliver aid and trying to do good to this country, he earned a military cross for bravery. You shouldn't be able to earn a military cross when you're delivering good things to people. This is a playground 20 years since it had last been used when we got to it, and we rebuilt it, and the playground and the amenities in this particular village were rebuilt completely by our engineers. And this is the most important piece. I was always blamed for switching off the power in Alamara. We returned power to Alamara 24 hours a day while we were in the desert by rebuilding, using military engineers, the whole electrical grid for Meizan. And now, and ever since we were there, they've had a few more hiccups, but ever since we were there, they've had 24-hour electricity. There is no doubt that the pivot worked in this case. And we left a country, frankly, that could govern itself. It didn't do it peacefully, because there were still the government forces versus the local people, but at least we delivered quality of life for a huge number of people in that in that region.
Yeah, fantastic, David. It's such a compelling story. But the piece that I love is around here's the mission and here's our initial strategy isn't working on the two above the line metrics and on my key one below the line metric. And then to pivot and change and then so dynamically impact on, because that's a big piece about what we're going to send people out to have a discussion about now is, right, what's your pivot? You know, and you heard Lou talk before around, okay, I'm a person who's delivered outstanding training
in a classroom.
And that's not a thing anymore. Okay, so what are we going to do? What can we do different? What can I do? This is still my mission because I'm passionate about it. I love it. How can I reimagine the value and now pivot and turn and create value on a level that creates this sort of impact and the sort of value that I want to create? So it's a really interesting question. So we're going to change up the groups again. We're going to send you out with some great people again. There's some great people in the room. I'm going to give you the opportunity to have a discussion about, right, what does that pivot look like? And we were lucky enough this morning to have a guy on the call, a client of mine who, through this challenging time, had been last on, first off. Lost his job, a high-profile job. And through his commitment to his mission and his ability to change his strategy to get there, he's got into a role that's now, well, at least on one of the metrics, paying more than it was before he lost the job. So that opportunity to pivot is out there. And I think about what the great work, the enormously fantastic work that the superstar Peter Turner has delivered through our 2BAPC program and how he's delivered that great value. It'd be super if he'd do a bit more work rather than play as much golf as he does. But in that said, worth every greatest decision I've made professionally. Peter Turner, superstar. And how he's pivoted 2BAPC from a classroom program to a digital program that's now had clients from 9 different countries during this challenging time. So when we send you out, we want you to think about your pivot. What does that look like? We're going to send you out for the same amount of time and understanding that you may not have completely created it in that time. Probably you haven't. But starting to put those seeds in, because it was in one of these breakout rooms that Peter and I had the seed of, let's do something differently with 2BAPC. Let's approach this. Let's have a different approach. And Martin Garvey, the mighty Martin Garvey, and Scotty Waygart, who was on a call with us last week, was the guy that started that green seed, those green shoots that turned into this. So this is your opportunity to think about a pivot. When we come back, we're going to have another little bit of a discussion, and then we're going to break out into some different things. So